I trusted him. I loved him. But then I found out he was dating my cousin behind my back. What would you do if your two closest people betrayed you? I'd known him forever. My best friend, my confidant, the one who made me laugh when everything else in life felt heavy. I'd always loved him quietly, secretly, hiding it behind jokes and friendly smiles. Everyone saw us as inseparable, the kind of friends people envied. But I carried this secret in my chest, small and aching. I convinced myself that keeping it safe was easier than risking it, easier than admitting the truth and possibly losing him forever. Every day, I watched him interact with everyone. But most of all, I noticed how he laughed at my cousin's jokes, how his eyes lingered just a second too long when she spoke. My chest tightened every time. But I pushed it away. I told myself it didn't matter. I could survive loving him from the sidelines. I rehearsed 1,000 times what I would say if I ever got the courage. "I like you," I'd whisper, voice trembling. Maybe he'd laugh, maybe he'd smile, maybe he'd pull me into a hug and say he felt the same. Maybe I'd finally get what I'd been longing for. The day came when I decided I couldn't wait any longer. My heart raced as I texted him, asking to meet at our favorite cafe. The cafe where we'd spent hours talking about everything and nothing, where I'd imagined this exact conversation 100 times. When I saw him waiting at our usual table, smiling and relaxed, my stomach twisted. I tried to act casual, tried to joke about small things, but inside, panic and excitement fought for control. When we ordered our drinks, I could no longer pretend. I took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes, feeling my chest tighten. I need to tell you something," I said, my hands trembling slightly. "I like you. More than a friend. I've liked you for a long time, and I can't keep it inside anymore." For a moment, silence. I could hear the background noise of the cafe fade as I watched his face change. I expected surprise, maybe confusion, maybe happiness. What I didn't expect was the way his expression softened into something almost guilty, almost embarrassed. He swallowed, avoiding my gaze. I don't know how to say this," he stammered. My stomach sank. My worst fear flashed in my mind. Then he finally looked at me, eyes wide. I'm seeing someone." I blinked, heart hammering. "Oh, okay. Who?" My voice was quiet, but I needed to know. His words hit me like a cold slap. "Your cousin," he said softly. The world tilted. My secret crush, the person I trusted more than anyone, had been dating my cousin behind my back all along. My chest ached. My heart felt like it had been ripped out and stomped on. I wanted to scream, cry, shake him, demand answers. But all that came out was a hollow, shaking laugh. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even look at him. The betrayal burned, sharp and raw, and in that moment, everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and friendship shattered into pieces. Have you ever confessed your feelings to someone only to find out they were secretly involved with someone close to you? How did it make you feel? I didn't know how I even got home. The cafe, the streets, the sunlight falling on familiar buildings. Everything felt unreal, like I was walking through a dream that had turned into a nightmare. My chest was tight, my mind racing, every heartbeat echoing the words I didn't want to hear. He's dating my cousin. The first person I needed to face wasn't him. It was her, my cousin. The one I trusted, laughed with, shared secrets with, and somehow, somewhere along the way, she had decided to cross a line I didn't even know existed. I called her, my voice trembling as I tried to sound casual. "Hey, can we talk?" She hesitated, her tone lighter than I expected. "Sure, what's up?" I could feel my hands clenching the phone. "I know, you and him. I know you've been seeing each other." There was a pause, a quiet intake of breath. I didn't know you'd find out like this," she said softly. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Didn't know I'd find out? You knew. You knew I liked him. You knew everything, and you still did this?" Her voice quivered slightly, but she tried to stay composed. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you. We didn't plan it. It happened, and we care about each other." Care? That word hit me harder than any insult. Care. While my chest shattered, while my feelings had been thrown aside, they cared about each other. I wanted to scream, but I kept my voice steady. "You didn't care about me at all. You knew, and you did it anyway. You betrayed me, and you betrayed our friendship." I hung up before she could respond. My fingers shook. My heart pounded. I felt like the walls of my own home had become too tight, closing in with every thought of them together. I couldn't understand how two people I loved, two people I trusted, could betray me so completely. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was personal, deep. It felt like an earthquake had ripped through my life, leaving debris in every corner. Laughter, memories, secrets, all tainted now. I spent the evening in my room, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. Anger, heartbreak, jealousy, sadness. They swirled together in a storm I couldn't control. I wanted to call him back, scream at him, demand explanations, but the words wouldn't come. My trust had been shattered. By midnight, my anger had transformed into something colder. If they thought they could get away with this without consequences, they were wrong. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let this betrayal slide. Not from my best friend and not from my cousin. Something had changed in me. The girl who had quietly loved, who had laughed, who had trusted without hesitation, she was gone, replaced by someone who wouldn't stay silent, someone who would make sure they understood the cost of their betrayal. And just like that, a plan began forming in my mind. Subtle, careful, but real. Revenge wasn't about hurting them physically. It was about making them feel the betrayal they had caused, making them understand that trust, once broken, leaves permanent cracks. I closed my eyes, the storm inside me quiet. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mixture of exhaustion and determination. My heart still ached from the betrayal, but the storm of anger had started to focus into something sharper, more precise. This wasn't about getting even for the sake of it. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and making sure they understood the consequences of betrayal. I started small, observing every interaction between them, every laugh they shared, every moment of casual affection. I noted it all quietly without revealing that I was paying attention. I watched how my cousin leaned in when he spoke, how he smiled in ways he never smiled at me. And with every observation, my resolve hardened. I wouldn't act impulsively. I would plan carefully. It wasn't about ruining their relationship. That would make me petty. It was about creating situations where the truth of their betrayal was undeniable, where the hurt they caused reflected back on them. I thought about subtle exposure, small truths slipping into conversations, moments that would make them uncomfortable and maybe make them reconsider their actions. The hardest part was pretending. Every day I interacted with him, I had to act normal, friendly even, hiding the mix of heartbreak and anger boiling beneath the surface. When he tried to make casual conversation, I smiled, nodding, listening, but inside, every word reminded me of his betrayal. My cousin, too, had to be treated the same way. Polite, distant, measured. No explosions, no accusations, just a quiet storm building. Lily noticed something was off when I met her later that afternoon. "You're quiet today. Everything okay?" she asked, concern in her voice. I smiled faintly. "Yeah, just tired, that's all." But inside, my mind was racing. I sketched out ideas, ways to subtly reveal secrets, to test their reactions, to make them feel a fraction of the hurt I had endured. Each plan required patience and timing. I had to be careful. One wrong move and it could all backfire. The betrayal had changed me, reshaped me in a way I hadn't expected. I'd always been trusting, kind, maybe too naive. Now I was alert, calculating, aware of human tendencies in ways I hadn't considered before. I realized the power of subtle influence, the strength of quiet observation. By evening, I had a tentative plan. I wouldn't rush. I wouldn't act out of blind anger. I would wait for the right moments, choosing carefully how to respond to their laughter, their whispers, their casual dominance over situations that had once included me. And as I sat by my window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt a strange calm. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but it no longer overwhelmed me. It had transformed into focus, strategy, and quiet power. This was no longer just a story of heartbreak. It was the beginning of a game, subtle, clever, and satisfying in its precision. And I was ready to play. Have you ever had to stay calm and plan carefully after someone betrayed your trust? How did you handle it? The next few days, I moved through the halls of school like a quiet observer, noticing how people interacted with him, with my cousin, with everyone around them. I had to understand the social landscape before making any moves. Every smile, every glance, every whispered conversation was data. I had to be careful. One wrong step, and it could backfire. During lunch, I sat with a group of friends, casually mentioning stories about honesty, loyalty, and trust. I didn't need to point fingers, not yet. Just the right tone, the right words, subtle enough for them to wonder, for curiosity to prick at their conscience. I watched him glance up from his table, my words landing where I wanted them. His eyes flickered briefly toward me, something unreadable passing over his face. Guilt? Surprise? I couldn't be sure. Later in the library, I found myself sitting near them, pretending to focus on my work while paying attention to their casual interactions. My cousin laughed at one of his jokes, leaning closer than I thought appropriate. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about reacting impulsively. It was about observation, planting seeds, letting subtle hints of tension creep in. I started leaving small, casual reminders of what they had done. A comment in a group chat about honesty, a carefully timed remark about the importance of trust and family. Innocuous, almost invisible, but enough to make them feel slightly watched. Not threatened, not angry, just aware that their actions had consequences, and someone knew. At home, I talked it out with my diary, my thoughts spilling onto the page in a way I couldn't share with anyone else. I admitted my heartbreak, my jealousy, my anger, but I also documented their patterns, the little details that would help me anticipate their next moves. I realized that planning my subtle revenge wasn't just about them. It was about reclaiming control over my own emotions, my own life. Friends started noticing the change in me. "You seem different," one of them commented, curious. I smiled faintly. "I've learned a lot about people lately," I said, leaving it at that. By evening, I had crafted a loose timeline. A few small actions, carefully spaced, designed to make them question their choices, to feel the faint echo of betrayal, to reflect on what they had done. I wasn't going to ruin them. I didn't need to. The point was awareness, reflection, and a little justice served quietly, cleverly. And through it all, I kept my interactions calm, friendly even, hiding the storm inside. People had no idea the careful calculations behind my smiles, no idea how much I was observing, planning, and preparing. As I closed my notebook, watching the sunset paint the sky again, I felt a thrill I hadn't expected. The power wasn't in revenge itself. It was in strategy, in understanding human nature, and knowing I could stand strong despite the heartbreak. I was no longer just the girl who loved in secret. I was someone who had survived betrayal, learned from it, and was ready to take control of the story. Have you ever planned a subtle way to teach someone a lesson without confronting them directly? How did it work out? The plan felt real now. I decided small moves, not dramatic ones. Big scenes shout anger. Quiet nudges make people notice themselves. That was my goal. I started with photos. I had seen them laughing at the cafe and cropped a casual candid my cousin posted. I posted an old group picture with a caption about honesty and loyalty. It was vague but loaded. Friends liked it. He noticed. She noticed. That tiny digital ripple reached them. Timing mattered. I showed up to a study group where they often met. I tossed out a casual line about how secrecy erodes trust. The room laughed, but my words landed. My cousin looked down. He fidgeted. He caught my eye and tried to smile, but the smile never reached him. At a small get-together, I told a joke about someone who lost friends over a hidden affair. It was playful, but sharp. People leaned in and asked questions. The laughter felt thin. Their closeness shifted. I watched them shrink into themselves. Guilt settled like a wet cloth. I left subtle breadcrumbs in conversations and group chats. A remark about family loyalty here. A meme about honesty there. Nothing accusatory. The aim was to spark doubt, not to scream betrayal. Someone always forwarded a message to another friend and then another. Rumors are quiet until they are not. Kindness became a tool. I helped my cousin with notes and offered to proofread his essay. I texted him supportive messages that hinted at disappointment in secrets. He read them and paused. Once he replied with a short thanks. The pause told me more than a confession ever would. I watched their body language carefully. He started walking a little straighter but avoiding eye contact. She laughed less in groups. The dynamic tipped. People began whispering not to hurt but because they were curious. A friend pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I smiled and said nothing. Let them ask. I resisted dramatic confrontation. Tears in the cafeteria would have made me small. Anger in front of mutual friends would have fed their narrative. I stayed composed. Composure sharpened the effect of my moves. Watching them feel exposed felt strange but powerful. It was not cruelty. It was a mirror. When the first direct question came, I felt a jolt. At a study session, one friend asked him casually about honesty in relationships. He stumbled, searched for words, and blurted something about mistakes. The room quieted. The truth leaned forward like a cat smelling rain. My chest tightened and a sharp relief rushed through me. The plan was working, not because I wanted revenge for its own sake, but because truth was seeping through the cracks. I wanted them to confront what they had done. I wanted them to own it or to lose it. Either way, the secret could not hold. I braced myself for the next move and watched patiently for consequences and truth. Have you ever plotted a quiet way to reveal someone's secret instead of confronting them head on? What happened? The next week felt like walking a tightrope. The seeds I planted were sprouting whispers and glances. I kept my routine pretending everything was normal while watching for changes. He avoided sitting where he could see me. She stopped tagging photos with him. The space between them grew awkward and brittle. One afternoon after class, I caught him alone by the stairwell. My heart thudded, but I stayed calm. Can we talk? I asked like it was casual. He ran a hand through his hair and looked guilty. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. It just happened. I care about her. Regret touched his voice, but there was a shield of excuse. I let him talk and I listened. People expect the betrayed to explode. They expect drama, but I had learned the power of stillness. You could have told me, I said softly. You could have been honest. He stared at his shoes. That evening, she tried to corner me in the laundry room. Her voice was high and angry. Why are you doing this? She demanded. Why are you spreading things? My answer was calm. I'm not spreading things. I'm letting people think. I'm letting truth breathe. She snapped that I was cruel, then walked off. The dividing line in our social circle became visible. Some friends asked questions in private. Others avoided involvement and retreated to safe, neutral ground. The rumor mill I'd nudged chewed through their secrecy. It smelled of guilt and fear. It tasted like justice. A small confrontation happened in the cafeteria when a mutual friend asked him straight up if he thought betrayal had consequences. He faltered and mumbled about mistakes. My cousin's face went white. She stared at him like she wanted to punch him. For a second, everything paused and the room felt fragile. People began to look at them differently. The jokes that used to follow their names quieted. Conversations that had been light now ducked into seriousness when their names came up. The silence around them grew heavy enough to sit on. That night, I walked past their common hangout and saw them arguing. The shapes moved, shadows sharp against the wall. I didn't listen long. Some things reveal themselves without eavesdropping. The line had cracked and the light was finding the gap. I wasn't unfeeling through all this. There were lonely nights when anger thinned into sadness and I questioned whether I'd gone too far. But when I thought of the secret kept from me, I collected my resolve like armor. People who break trust should feel the weight of that break. I spent days preparing for the inevitable fallout, plotting small, supportive confrontations to catch them off guard while leaving room for honesty to emerge. I waited sharp, ready for the moment when truth fell into view. The crack had widened. The truth sat at the edge and soon it would tip into something unavoidable. Have you ever watched a secret you exposed start to unravel someone else's world? How did it feel watching the truth come out? It happened sooner than I expected. One afternoon in the library, I was studying when I noticed him fidgeting at a nearby table. My cousin was whispering to him, her voice low and sharp. I didn't need to eavesdrop to sense the tension. I could see it in the way he avoided eye contact, in the way she clenched her hands. He stood abruptly, muttered something, and left. She stayed behind, looking around nervously. The silence between us was electric when our eyes met across the room. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just watched. Later, during a casual group chat with friends, one of them asked him point blank, "Do you think you've been fair?" He froze. My chest tightened. The room went still. His voice faltered. I've made mistakes, he admitted. Not loudly, not proudly, just quietly, but it was enough. Enough to show that he understood at least a little that trust was broken. That evening, I received a message from my cousin, curt and trembling. We need to talk. Alone, I agreed, feeling my stomach tighten. She met me at the park, the sky painted in streaks of gold and pink. She tried to act calm, but I could see the cracks in her facade. Why are you doing this? She asked, voice sharp. Why are you making everything so public? I leaned back on the bench, letting the breeze settle my thoughts. I'm not making it public. I'm letting the truth breathe. People are noticing what happens when trust is broken. You both knew what you were doing. I just didn't stay silent. Her eyes flashed with frustration and guilt. I didn't think you'd find out. It wasn't supposed to hurt you. I laughed softly, bitterly. It hurt me because I trusted both of you. It hurt me because you didn't care enough to be honest. And now you're feeling the weight of that. You're learning that actions have consequences. She stayed silent, staring at the ground, and for the first time I felt a small sense of relief. Not victory, not joy, but clarity. They had to face the consequences themselves. I didn't need to punish them. The weight of guilt was already settling on their shoulders. The next day at school, their behavior shifted again. Whispers followed them. Friends started to avoid sitting near them. People looked at them differently, and I noticed he was quieter, more aware, and maybe even regretful. My cousin's usual confidence faltered. I realized revenge wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about making them cry or exposing secrets for sport. It was about showing the natural outcome of their choices. Trust broken, isolation creeping in, and reflection forced by circumstance. That night, lying in bed, I felt the tension inside me start to ease. The heartbreak was still there, sharp and raw, but the anger had turned into strategy fulfilled. I had planted the seeds, guided them toward awareness, and finally, the first confession had emerged. The game wasn't over. The journey through betrayal, regret, and subtle justice was only halfway done, but I was stronger, sharper, and more in control than I'd ever been before. Have you ever seen someone admit their mistakes quietly without a big scene? Did it feel like justice was served? By the start of the next week, I realized that subtlety alone wasn't enough. The first confession had shaken them, but they were still together, still hiding behind excuses and shared smiles. It was time to turn the tables, to push them further into the uncomfortable reality they had created. I began planting more direct but still polite reminders. In conversations about loyalty or relationships, I would drop carefully crafted statements, not accusatory, just obvious to anyone paying attention. It's amazing how honesty changes everything, I said once in the cafeteria. Letting the words float in the air, their heads snapped up. Eyes met mine. Silence. I smiled, polite, neutral. But inside, I was thrilled. At lunch, a friend asked him about family values. He stammered, aware that all eyes were subtly on him. My cousin shifted in her seat, trying to seem casual but failing. Their usual effortless confidence had evaporated. People were noticing, whispering, glancing. The isolation was beginning. I started arranging group activities, subtle ones, that would force him and my cousin into social scrutiny. During a small study session, I mentioned a discussion about relationships and honesty. I left hints that certain betrayals were hard to forgive. He fidgeted. She leaned back and everyone else leaned forward, curious. The tension was visible, almost electric. My friends began asking questions indirectly, curious about the awkwardness surrounding them. I answered with vague statements, letting people draw their own conclusions. Each small spark of doubt, each whisper of suspicion, amplified the weight of their actions. One evening, my cousin tried to corner me at the library, demanding I stop. Her voice trembled, half fear, half anger. "You're ruining everything. Just leave us alone." I stayed calm, letting her outburst fade. "I'm not doing anything except letting reality speak for itself," I said, and it was true. The truth doesn't need me to shout. It makes its own noise. The following day, I saw the cracks widening. He avoided conversations, choosing his words carefully when speaking. She laughed less. Friends who used to follow them around were starting to drift. Even strangers seemed to sense the tension. The social landscape had shifted. At night, I allowed myself a small smile. Revenge, subtle and strategic, was more satisfying than I expected. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about consequence. They had chosen secrecy and betrayal. Now the world reflected it back to them. But I knew the endgame wasn't complete. There was still the matter of facing them directly, of letting them acknowledge what they had done in full. That confrontation would be the climax, the point where the lessons became undeniable. Until then, I remained patient, observing, guiding, and letting the ripple of truth spread naturally. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the strategist, calm and collected, letting justice unfold in its own way. The game was mine to direct, and I wasn't about to let it slip from my hands. Have you ever carefully influenced a situation so someone faced the consequences of their actions? How did it feel to watch it unfold? It finally happened. I had arranged a small get-together under the guise of a casual study session, but in my mind, it was the stage for the confrontation that had been building for weeks. Friends arrived, chatting and laughing, unaware that this was more than just a study session. I stayed calm, sipping my tea, observing. They walked in together, my cousin and he, confident as always, or at least trying to be. But I could see the tension creeping in, subtle yet undeniable. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Every glance between them was calculated, cautious. I had prepared for this moment, rehearsed in my mind how I would speak, how I would make them face their choices without losing my composure. When everyone settled, I finally spoke. "You know," I said, my voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot about honesty, trust, and the consequences of betrayal. It's strange how someone can seem so close and yet hide so much." I let the words hang, just long enough for curiosity and discomfort to settle over them. He shifted uncomfortably. She tensed. I continued, calm and unwavering. "It's fascinating how decisions affect everyone around us, how secrets have a way of surfacing, even when we think no one is paying attention." Eyes in the room started flicking toward them. My words weren't loud, but the implication was clear. Finally, I looked directly at them. "I trusted both of you. I trusted you and I loved you and I believed in the bond we shared. But it seems some things were kept hidden, even from the people who cared the most." I watched him swallow. She avoided my gaze. The air in the room shifted. It was quiet enough to hear the ticking of a clock. I could see the weight of their guilt pressing down, small cracks forming in their composure. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," I said softly. "I'm here to let the truth speak for itself. Choices matter. Actions have consequences. Betrayal, once done, leaves marks. And now," I let the pause stretch, my eyes never leaving theirs, "you get to live with the echoes of those choices." He finally spoke, voice low and shaky. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was wrong." My cousin stayed silent, tears threatening in her eyes, and I realized the truth had finally landed. They understood in their own way the weight of what they had done. I smiled faintly, not triumphantly, but peacefully. I had stayed calm, observed, and let justice unfold naturally. No shouting, no dramatic scenes, no humiliation, just truth, and the undeniable awareness of their choices. By the end of the session, the tension lingered, but so did a strange clarity. Relationships had shifted, trust had been broken, and though I still felt pain, I felt strength too. The strength that comes from surviving betrayal, reclaiming your voice, and making the consequences real without losing yourself. Have you ever confronted someone quietly and let the truth speak for itself instead of exploding at them? Did it have more impact than a dramatic reaction? The days after the confrontation were quieter, but the change was unmistakable. He and my cousin avoided the usual casual displays of closeness. Their whispers became cautious, their laughter measured. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth had done its work, and I felt a strange calm settling over me. I spent the next week focusing on myself, rediscovering the space between heartbreak and healing. The betrayal still lingered like a shadow, but it no longer controlled me. I could breathe again, think clearly, and move forward without the constant ache of secrecy and lies. Friends who had been wary of the tension approached me cautiously, curious but respectful. Are you okay? They asked. I smiled, not the forced smile I'd worn for weeks, but a real one. I am now, I said. I've learned a lot about trust, about honesty, and about standing up for yourself even when it's hard. I realized that my love for him had taught me something crucial. Love is powerful, but self-respect is stronger. I had loved quietly, deeply, and painfully, but I had also learned that silence in the face of betrayal isn't strength. Strength is knowing your worth, reclaiming your voice, and letting consequences unfold naturally. The best part was watching subtle changes in the social circle. People began treating them differently, not cruelly, but cautiously. They had to face their own actions without me pushing them harshly. The world mirrored the choices they had made, and that was enough. One afternoon, I sat with my journal and wrote down every emotion I had felt: heartbreak, anger, jealousy, and finally, empowerment. Each word was a release, a reminder that I had survived and grown stronger. I didn't need revenge to feel fulfilled. Seeing truth take its course was enough. I thought about my best friend, not with love now, but with clarity. I forgave him silently, not because what he did was okay, but because holding on to resentment would have poisoned me. Forgiveness was for me, to free myself from lingering pain. My cousin, too, faded from my anger. I no longer needed confrontation. She had learned her lesson through the weight of her choices. The space between us remained, but it was no longer heavy with betrayal. It was simply history, a chapter closed. That night, I sat by my window, watching the sunset, and felt a rare kind of peace. I had loved, I had been hurt, and I had grown. Betrayal had tested me, but I had endured. I had reclaimed my power, my voice, and my life. And in that moment, I knew something essential. Heartbreak doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. The secret crush that once hurt me had become a lesson. The betrayal, a catalyst. And I emerged not just surviving, but thriving. Have you ever turned a painful betrayal into a lesson or source of strength? How did it change you?